over my shoulder, you can see the iconic St. John's Church, where President Trump on Monday night used force and U.S. military might to clear the way of peaceful protesters demonstrating right outside of its doors. Senator Mike Braun addressed the likelihood of a therapeutic or vaccine becoming available sooner than originally anticipated. In the nation's capital, urgency is growing for lawmakers to reach a deal on the next coronavirus stimulus bill. Negotiations continued Thursday between top Trump administration officials and congressional Democrats. Lawmakers in D.C. continue to meet with agencies to address the public health crisis that is coronavirus. In Washington, D.C., Kelly Cannon, ABC 57 News. We're here in Phoenix ahead of Donald Trump's rally tonight at the Coliseum. He's kicking off a 3-day consecutive tour on the West Coast, doing rallies, talking to supporters, and getting crowds fired up for 2020. The White House resumed its case for President Trump's acquittal today amidst explosive claims over the weekend from President Trump's former national security advisor, House managers are making their case for the removal of the president based on an abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. It led to seismic political changes, including the withdrawal of Syrian troops, which many saw as an occupying force here, and continuing political instability. I'm Kelly Cannon, reporting in Washington, D.C., where truck drivers have gathered on one of the busiest streets in the nation's capital, protesting since the beginning of May. That's all for this week. Thank you for letting us into your homes this spring and allowing us to share these stories with you during these trying times. For Northwestern News Report, I'm Kelly Cannon. Take care of yourself and each other. Behind me, protesters are gathered together chanting "No justice, no peace." And justice today took a turn in the case of George Floyd. The 9th day of nationwide protests following Floyd's death brought a brief reprieve Wednesday when the remaining 3 officers involved were charged and brought into custody. But the situation in the nation's capital has escalated since Monday after federal forces deployed chemical agents on peaceful protesters in Lafayette Square. The aggressive tactics were used to clear the area for President Trump, who staged a controversial photo op outside St. John's Church.
I got shot by rubber bullets and pepper sprayed on Sunday for peacefully protesting. I did not deserve that, and it happened anyway.
Despite those physical risks and the dangers of the coronavirus, protesters remain out in full force.
We going through a whole world crisis and you still killing our people?
It is exhausting.
As the nation grapples with race after Floyd's killing and a pandemic that is disproportionately affecting African American communities, protesters pledge to carry on.
Using my voice, making sure that Trump hears me. And I know that one day he will. And he will know my face and my name. Because he needs to understand that we know what is going on. And we will not stand for it anymore.
As first-time protesters like Ariana Evans break their silence to call for justice and equity amidst both a pandemic and the tragic losses of lives, including that of George Floyd, moments like this one offer messages of solidarity and hope. In Washington, D.C., Kelly Cannon, Medill reports. Increasing concerns tonight from the U.S. Postal Service in a letter warning over 40 states that it cannot guarantee all mail-in ballots will arrive in time to be counted in the upcoming presidential election. But the president himself has been one of the leading voices opposing funding for the critical service.
You can't do the mail-in ballots because you're going to have tremendous fraud. They'll be grabbing them from mailboxes. They'll even be printing them. They'll use the same paper, the same machines, and they'll be printing ballots illegally.
President Trump has railed against voting by mail with unsubstantiated claims that it results in voter fraud and the practice will produce a rigged election. Yet experts say the evidence shows fraud involved with all-mail voting is rare.
In states that have conducted all-mail elections, they have done studies on voter fraud. They have investigated, and they are very rare.
There is now popular support for an election with widespread and accessible mail-in voting options. But experts are divided on the best way to facilitate that for voters come November.
Expand access, make it easier for people to vote absentee by sending out absentee ballot request forms or applications, but don't just automatically send out the absentee ballots themselves to everyone on the voter registration database, precisely because we know for a fact in most jurisdictions, as many as 1 in 8 records in those systems are inaccurate or outdated or fraudulent.
As the Postal Service braces for a surge in election mail, the agency has faced additional challenges from none other than the president himself, who most recently threatened to withhold funding in the latest coronavirus relief negotiations to prevent people from voting by mail.
But if they don't get those 2 items, that means you can't have universal mail-in voting.
The pandemic has upended the 2020 election cycle and made the Postal Service arguably more important than ever. With funding uncertain, election officials in key battleground states like Wisconsin are now scrambling to ramp up for a safe and secure election taking place amid a pandemic.
We want to make sure that everybody who wants to request an absentee ballot can get one, can get it in time, and get it back in time, and do that in a way where their ballot will be counted.
In Washington, Kelly Cannon, Medill reports. Free them now. That's the message from these protesters outside the Arizona Department of Corrections last Friday. They are pushing for early release of some inmates as coronavirus cases begin to spread throughout the state's prison system. Lisa White was one of the family members protesting. Her son has less than a year left on his sentence, and she wants him released early.
He loved to play basketball, and he would love to be outdoors and video games, of course.
Have you talked to your son since the outbreak of the coronavirus, and has he talked about whether social distancing is possible for him where he's at?
He could still feel the wall on this side and the wall, the next person on each side of his hands. They got to make room to put 240 plus men in there.
Social distancing is virtually impossible under these conditions in prison. They present ripe breeding grounds for a highly contagious virus like COVID-19. According to the Arizona Department of Corrections website, the most recent numbers show 25 positive cases of coronavirus in the system. But the data supplied by the ADOC does not include testing information on guards, staffers, or healthcare workers in the prisons.
You know, there's no transparency between the prison officials and the community right now. You know, it's sadly disturbing as a mother, because I don't want to bring my son home back, the body back. I want my son to be safe. I want my son to come home to me. I've already missed too many holidays and too many birthdays and family events with my son. I lost a lot of time.
As the outbreak continues in China and across the globe, researchers and doctors at Institut Pasteur in Paris, France, are making great strides. Researchers in Paris celebrated an early feat in the battle against COVID-19 Wednesday, announcing the Pasteur Institute was the first in Europe to successfully isolate the strains of the virus and sequence its genome, a critical step in developing a vaccine. Still, much is unknown about the novel coronavirus that emerged late last year in central China, including how effective a vaccine will ultimately be.
Coronaviruses, we know that people who are infected and cured generally generate a strong antibody response, which is protective. So probably there won't be cases of relapse. The situation is different with other viruses, such as HIV.
How do you see journalism changing today? What's the role of fake news in the media, and how do we combat it?
I think we're in a very significant transitional period.
And what about the audience? What is their role in seeking out the truth and choosing their media sources?
I think that you have audience segments that are very serious about looking at different news sources, a mosaic of inputs in terms of what you're being told, and vote for who you want in power.
Well, with the elections coming up in 2020, it seems just a stone's throw away. I think that's an important message. Thank you so much for your time. Hello and welcome to this special edition of Northwestern News Report. I'm your host, Kelly Cannon. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That's how long a Minneapolis police officer held his knee on George Floyd's neck before he died. Floyd is one of a long list of black men whose death at the hands of police was captured on camera. Many of those protesters were demanding real results, real change, and already we're starting to see some of just that. The city of Minneapolis, in a unanimous vote by its city council, voting to completely restructure its police department. New York City also deciding to shift funding from the NYPD to youth and social services. Many police departments have banned chokeholds. Big names who have previously expressed racist views in the past now fired from their jobs. NASCAR voting to ban the Confederate flag at all of their racetracks. And in a startling turn, the NFL apologizing for not listening to players and for banning their method of protesting racism on the field, taking a knee. The stunning announcement comes after some of the league's most famous black players made a powerful video. Watch the video and hear what NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell has to say. Our reporter in Texas found that protests for racial equality have even shown up in neighborhoods where you never would have seen them before. How do police officers feel about all this, and where do they stand in the push for sweeping police reform? That's one of the more surprising parts of the story. Officers across the country have been seen kneeling in solidarity with the protesters. Even the Fraternal Order of Police coming out and publicly condemning the killing of George Floyd. That's where our next story takes us, to Maine, talking to law enforcement officials who say they've had conversations after the killing of George Floyd they never expected to have before. Long lines, fewer polling places and polling workers due to the coronavirus, and a brand new voting system that upended Georgia's state primary last week. Those were just some of the issues that plagued the state's elections when they took place last Tuesday.
It feels like there's been kind of a blame game as well going on in Georgia between election officials who are trying to do their job in their counties and the Secretary of State's office. Can you speak to me a little bit about what that tension is?
Lines that were 6 hours long and 8 hours long. Everyone knew there were serious problems.
Stay with us after the break. We talk about the coronavirus and a concerning uptick in cases in states across the country as first responders continue their fight on the front lines. As we close the show this week, we take a look at the first responders, heroes on the front lines, nurses still fighting as cases surge across the nation.
8 days in a row in New York City coming up. I'm trying to mentally prepare for it. I honestly can't even think about it right now because today was a really good day and I want to stay positive.
Bye.
Nurses who are on the front lines in the early COVID response now find themselves returning to battle.
This was like so abrupt. We did not think this was going to happen. No. We heard that New York needed help, and within 4 days we signed contracts. Within 6 days we were on airplanes.
I'm not asking you to help New York just to help New York. I'm asking you to help New York to help yourselves.
I've been indecisive my entire life. Completely indecisive about every single thing I've ever had to make a decision about, and nursing is, I confidently say, the most. I've never been more sure. In all its, brutality, it's the reason why I think we became nurses. So, if anything, it just reinforces.
I'll tell you what, if we weren't working as a team right now in this hospital, a lot of people would be losing their loved ones.
What do you wish people knew that they don't know? You are on the front lines of this crisis. You are seeing things that you didn't expect to see in your profession. What does the general public need to know and understand about this virus?
These patients are alone and they don't have their loved one holding their hand and they're passing away and you don't know if they can hear you, if they understand what's going on. And that's something that we were not prepared for.
But with the trauma and pain they've experienced comes the gratitude from all of us.
You want to talk about extraordinary individuals. Extraordinary. And it's the nurses and the doctors and the healthcare workers who show up every day and walk into a situation that they don't even know what they're walking into. The tough times that forge character. And that's what we're looking at right now. We're going to get through this.
To our first line responders, to our nurses, we can never repay you for what you have done for us. Thank you. That's all for this week. Thank you for letting us into your homes this spring and allowing us to share these stories with you during these trying times. For Northwestern News Report, I'm Kelly Cannon. Take care of yourself and each other.